Right. So, hi everybody. My name is Jane Rabinovich. I guess you can go to the next slide. So I've been with Fairfax County Master Gardeners for 4 years now. I guess I'm starting my 5th year. Um, I'm not a big fan of the term master, but I am very much, I love to garden. I love to learn about gardening. So, I mean, that's why I love the program, because we get to just see all the latest research. And anyway, I've lived in Reston for about 10 years. I'm in Reston, but I'm not in the Reston Association. So I'm not in a homeowners association. So that's going to guide a little bit of what I'm going to talk about today, because I don't have to keep up with any sort of aesthetic standards or anything like that. And I also do a lot of my gardening. I'm trying to do more native plants, although this picture in my slide is mostly non-native plants with alliums and iris. But yeah, I do a mix of things, but that's sort of my current passion is native plants. So plants that are native to this area. Next slide, please. So sort of my fall cleanup philosophy, and it's gaining a lot of traction. It's not just me, but it's something that's getting more popular these days, is I basically do as little as possible. And, it's not really laziness. It's more just, there's a lot of ecological benefits to waiting until spring, and I'm going to go into that in more detail. But really all I do is I just take leaves off of hard surfaces. So the paths, the driveway, storm drains, because obviously you want them to still drain, like from the 2 inches of rain we had yesterday. I don't own a leaf blower. I just use a rake. I don't even use a brush because I'm not trying to get every single leaf. So I'm definitely not going for perfection in any kind of way. And I'm going to go into all these in more detail, but I do mulch my leaves into my grass. I leave the seed heads on. You can kind of see this is a picture of my backyard. So I do have some pretty big trees that are hanging over. So I do get quite a bit of leaves, but everything I'm going to say it's always, there's exceptions. So like a neighbor 2 doors down from me has a huge tree in her front yard that has huge leaves on it. If she was going to leave that on her grass, she would not have grass the next spring. So there's always exceptions to all of this, but I just want to fill you in on kind of what I do, and then you can take what you want from that. And then in the foreground of this picture, you can see I've left the seed heads on my flowers from the summer. So there's liatris, I think, and asters. And then the other note I want to make is vegetable gardens are a little different from this. We do have a vegetable garden on the side of our house. And a lot of times with that, you do want to do a pretty good cleanup at the end of each season, just because if you did have any viruses or anything with your plants, then you want to, reduce the spread of that for the next season. Next slide. Okay, so yeah, so this is my seal here. I am a lazy gardener, but no, I mean it's a sort of it's something that's backed up by a lot of some of the nature conservancy, as you can see here, Audubon. A lot of the places are trying to encourage people to do a little bit less, especially in the fall with their gardens, to clean them up. Next slide, please. So why do I want to do less? Why has this become sort of a movement? Part of it is from an ecological standpoint, our gardens are really havens for animals. Insect populations, as you've probably seen, are decreasing. When you have insects declining, then that leads to birds declining because they feed on the insects. There's a research study, it was done by Doug Ptolemy out of University of Delaware, that shows, I think, chickadees, when they're raising their young, that one like sort of batch, that's not the right word, but one brood, I think, of chickadees, which is usually like 5 babies, takes about 6,000 caterpillars, I think, to raise one brood. And that's a little bird. So you kind of wonder what robins and they really need caterpillars because they have lots of protein in them. So yeah, if you have insects declining, then you're also going to have birds declining, bats, etc. So it's all part of the food web. And I think it's also just sort of like re-looking at what is beauty in the garden, you know, like, and I am guilty of this. I'm sort of learning as I go. I used to rake everything. But now, you know, I think if you look at beauty in a different way, then you can see that you're like, oh, the frost on the flower heads is really pretty. And there's also benefit if you take all the leaves off of your property, then you're taking away a lot of nutritional benefits for your property. Next slide. So when we look at the leaves that are coming down from the trees, a lot of them have caterpillar eggs, cocoons that have been laid on those eggs. So again, if we take away those leaves from our gardens, you know, put them out as yard waste, you're taking a lot of life out of your garden, and that's life that's critical for the whole ecological evolution. Next slide. This is sort of a close-up on one of my flower beds from, I want to say, Monday or Tuesday. So as you can see, again, I only take leaves off of the hard surfaces. I just leave them on my beds. If it's really deep, you know, so Doug Ptolemy, again, he sort of says if it's more than 3 or 4 inches, then you may want to, you know, take some of it off. I'm probably more like 2 to 3 inches, and then I start to get a little like, oh, am I smothering my plants? But, you know, when I think of like going on woodland walks in the spring, you know, up at Riverbend Park or something, like those spring emergents are coming up, and it's not like someone's out there leaf blowing our parks. So the plants know what to do. And the leaves really do help to protect the plants over the winter, especially if you've planted new plants that are young. Sometimes those plugs, when we get all the freeze-thaw cycles, they tend to erupt out of the soil. So they really do help to sort of protect the plants. Next slide. So what we do in my backyard, and again, I've got about 1/3 an acre, so I recognize that I have a pretty big suburban yard. But for all the leaves that I take off of the hard surfaces on my property, we have 2 piles. This is down at the back of our garden. You can see the one on the left is this year's leaves. The one on the right is last year's leaves. And the one on the right, it's already turned into leaf compost. So basically over the year, it starts turning into a compost, and then we use that to amend the soil. So I've been planting a lot this fall, and I'll, you know, get suckered into buying more plants over the winter. And so I'll be planting more in the spring. And it's not that I'm really trying to add nutrition so much to my soil. It's almost more, I have a lot of clay soil. And so I use it just to almost kind of break up the clay soil when I'm planting, just mix it in there so it doesn't sort of coagulate into a clay bowl every time I plant something. And then typically by early summer, what we'll do is we'll take the leaves from the pile on the left and sort of turn it over into the pile on the right. Because one thing that really helps with compost piles is to stir them every once in a while. I can't say that we're very good about that. You know, I work, my husband works, we have 2 teenage boys, so life happens, but it really does help to speed the process when you do that. Next slide. So this is kind of then the transition. So it starts out as a leaf pile. Honestly, my leaf pile is kind of smaller than it used to be because I used to rake everything into there, but now I just mostly rake the driveways, etc. But then over the year, it somehow miraculously changes into this dark, wonderful stuff. And then that's what I use. You can see in the pot. Sometimes I just use it as mulch, you know, so I'll put it on top. Instead of buying wood chips and that type of thing. That there's been studies shown that, you know, some insects can still burrow into your beds, which you want, better if it's just leaf litter versus like the big chunks of wood. Next slide. And then as far as the grass, so I leave the leaves on my flower beds. With the grass, I really just, you know, use my lawnmower that I use all summer, and I just keep mowing, and I basically chew up that litter into smaller pieces. And there has been some research done. Michigan State University did some research, and you can read through that in more detail if you like, but it does actually show, and I saw a website it was Scott's, which is one of the big, you know, when you buy your fall seed, grass seed, they were saying, you know, just mulch your leaves into the lawn. It actually, you know, provides nutrition. And again, a light layer of whole leaves, even if you decide not to chop it up with your lawnmower, also won't hurt the lawn. Again, I talk about my neighbor 2 doors down that, you know, if she left her leaves, I think it would really smother it. But yeah, there's been a lot of research that shows that this is actually healthier for your lawn. If we go to the next slide. So this is a picture of my grass from Tuesday before it rained. And so this is kind of like a typical, you know, like I think in the fall, I almost mow more than in the summer. Like I probably mow like every 4 or 5 days, but it's definitely not like I don't make sure I'm overlapping in my lanes or anything like that. I'm just mowing mostly just to chew up the leaves. So afterwards, obviously there is still leaves on the grass, but they're much smaller. The chances that they're going to smother everything are pretty low. I'm not, I'll say this right now, I'm not like a lawn perfection person. Yes, you can probably tell that from my talk so far. I have lots of violets in my lawn. I'm fine with that. You know, so if you're the type of person that really prides yourself on your lawn, then you might choose a different approach. But it certainly is the approach I've used, and I feel like my lawn looks pretty decent. All right, next slide. And then this is the other thing, is about leaving the seed heads on your flowers. This is something that I do. A lot of it, if you look at our native bees, a lot of them, if they don't burrow in the ground, and they need to be able to get into the ground, a lot of them actually lay their eggs in the hollow stems of perennials and grasses. And I think it's actually a 2-year cycle, and you can sort of see that in the graphic. But you know, even once you clip them in the spring, if you're willing to, and just let them sort of fall around the base of the flower, and once the plant starts growing, you probably won't notice it down there anyway. But even once you've trimmed those, you know, that's also when bees can get in there and lay their eggs. And if you have any echinacea, coneflower, I'm sure you've probably seen goldfinches all over them. You know, so leaving those seed heads out for the birds, migrating birds, or birds that stay here all winter, is beneficial. Next slide. I feel like I'm going too long like I did last time. All right, so here's some pictures of, again, my garden. So you can see I've got, I think that's panicum. It's but anyway, it's a grass on the left there. And then this is you can see my lovely trampoline in the back there. But you know, again, I try and leave my plants as much as I can. Sometimes if I'm planting new plants in the fall and I just can't wiggle my way in there, then I will prune the plants back around it a little bit. And again, I'll just leave the pods and everything just down on the soil. Last slide, I think. Oh no, last 2. The other thing that we do is we get a lot of branches down in our backyard, and I really just pile them up. I'll sort of, you know, snap them because they're usually quite dead. And I pile them up at the very back of our backyard. Now we kind of have a gradual slope going down. And so I've sort of been doing it as a way to sort of build up that spot, because it's like a low spot in our yard. And so after a while, once, you know, I've got a pretty good pile of sticks going, and I might go stomp on them, which is actually quite therapeutic. You know, and stomp them down a bit, and then I'll add more. And over time, then I've also been reducing the amount of lawn in my yard. So I'll throw like the turf I've taken out on top of there, and I'll throw that soil compost the leaf compost on there. And then I plant plants on it, and it just sort of turns into a bed that decays over time, and it adds a little bit of height to the back of our yard. Last slide. Oh, and there's some resources. So if you want to, again, this is my philosophy, but it is also something that, you know, I think more people are trying to do. I think resisting the urge to tidy everything up before winter, and leave some things out there so we can encourage insects and birds. And it's definitely a different way of thinking. Like, I know sometimes I'll look at it like my silky dogwood, and there's some bug that's been eating all the leaves on it. And you know, part of me wants to say, oh, but the other part's like, wow, that plant's really being used. It's really being used by our insects. So it's definitely a different frame of mind, but it's something that I'm really enjoying. And I guess that's it. So are there any questions?
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Gardner Jane. I really enjoyed that. I have a question, and Gardner Jim will be looking at the chat to see if there are other questions. But while that's in progress, what do you do with your Japanese stiltgrass? Do you put that into your compost, or do you bag it up and get rid of it in the trash?
Yeah, so I've sort of, I do a mix of things. So I don't add it to my leaf compost because I'm not sure exactly how hot that bed gets, because it's sort of in the sun and in the shade. And you want it to get it to a certain temperature to kill the seed viability. So I kind of vacillate between putting it in my yard waste or bagging it up and putting it in the trash. My husband works in sustainability, and he was a little aghast when he saw me putting it in the trash, because he's like, that's not what landfills are for. And so then it sort of made me think a little differently. He's like, if the city is really doing their compost of our yard waste the right way, it should get hot enough to kill the seeds of invasive plants. But, it sort of depends if I trust that Fairfax County, I guess, is doing it the right way. So yeah, I'm still trying to learn the best thing to do there. Everything I sort of see on native plant forums says to put it in the trash. So you're not, like I've gotten rid of a few, like I'm trying to get rid of a burning bush right now in my front, and I've gotten rid of some barberries, and I was putting them in the trash because I thought that was the right thing to do. So I don't know if someone else has better insight on that. Oh, but stiltgrass specifically, I had a lot of stiltgrass in my lawn. I don't use chemicals on my lawn, so I pulled it all by hand, which really was terrible. And I think that was before my talk with my husband, so I think I put it in the trash. So